When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation that happened in the summer involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They are some years apart, but his younger brother was born with various health issues including multiple sclerosis, and he is confined to a wheelchair and cannot take care of himself. So to keep an eye on him overnight, and his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night my friend woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed very startlingly a strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat looking in through the window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the lights on. Then he ran into his parents' room to tell them what he had saw. When his parents came back into the room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in his crib. A few of his family members say it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night, and my friend believes it was death.
I grew up in a town with just under 900 people. When I was 14, there were 42 students in my entire class. It's a farming community in Oregon, basically in the middle of nowhere, and surrounded by other small farming towns. My best friend Sarah and I went to the varsity baseball games as we had nothing better to do. It was fun, and Sarah's older brother Aaron was a pitcher. Aaron's best friend Sam was 1 year out of high school and was the assistant coach to the baseball team. Sarah and Aaron's parents often left us at their house alone with alcohol and no rules. My parents didn't care what I was doing, and even though Sam still lived with his parents at 19, Sarah and I had never met them. I suppose they didn't care either. The four of us hung out at the house at the same time, and because we were only 14, Aaron and Sam kept a brotherly eye on us. None of their senior friends would touch us, even if we threw ourselves at them in a drunken haze. Basically, it was Aaron and Sam's fault we didn't have boyfriends freshman year. It was one of the last games of the season. Aaron was pitching and Sam was coaching. After losing the game, the team, plus Sarah and I, threw a party as usual. The parties always happened, win, lose or rain. We drank and hung out, listened to music and played drinking games. We were all completely average teenagers with average small-town lives. After I had consumed far more vodka than orange juice, I spilled a drink on the kitchen floor. Sam helped me clean it up, and we stood around talking a little bit before he insisted I go lay down before I fell on my face. He helped me to Sarah's room, gave me a little hug, and put me on the bed. Before he drove home, he checked on me, gave me a little wave, and said goodnight, and I passed out in a fuzzy bliss. No matter how many times I go over the next day in my mind, it never seems right. It was surreal and something I have never understood. The next thing I can remember was screaming, and Sarah and I woke up to her mother freaking out. In the living room, both Sarah's parents, Aaron, and the county sheriff were standing there. Everyone was way too upset for it to have been something we did. I felt sick and terrified. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. The sheriff asked me when the last time was I saw Sam. I couldn't speak, couldn't figure out what any of them were saying anymore. I managed to say, I was drunk, and the sheriff asked Sarah the same question. She said the same, so he simply wrote it down and turned away from us. It was all very strange. Sam was missing. They had to find him. Sam had run away. Finally, I started putting my thoughts together, and I came to the conclusion that Sam was running from the police because he had killed his parents. He'd killed them when he'd gotten home from the party with an axe from the woodshed. He had attended the game and the party, then went home, picked up an axe, and struck his father in the head while he was watching TV. His mother managed to make it to the phone and dialed 911. Sam killed her with blows from the axe while she spoke to the 911 operator. Then he disappeared for 2 days. Honestly, from the moment I learned what had happened to until Sam had turned himself in, I was in a daze. I kept expecting it to be a dream or a sick joke. For those whole 2 days, I can't remember what I did or who I talked to. It didn't help that Sarah and I increased our alcohol and drug intake. He was always such a normal guy. None of us could imagine what he was capable of. We were all just typical kids. This was 20 years ago now, and people still avoid talking about it. I never tell the story, either.
I was a 18-year-old high school senior and was about 3/4 of the way through the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school that was about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few of my old friends from that school, and got invited to go camping with them over Memorial Weekend, which basically meant getting drunk as fuck in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night, and met them in the closest town from the campsite about 40 minutes away. The guy, Jeremy, hopped in my car, and the 2 other girls followed me up, and we got to the campsite without incident. This campsite was 30 minutes away from any human sign of life outside a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine with everybody getting completely trashed, and me beating one of the girls I brought along named Sarah at beer pong, and she was very drunk and all over me. I guess to the 18-year-old version of me, that night couldn't have been going better at that point. At about 12:30, things started to die down, as half of us have already puked, and were heading in for the night, and I was much too drunk to try to fuck Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent. There was 5 of us, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of a shotgun. I was still very drunk and had a hard time processing anything. But in my drunken state, I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being a dick. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought a couple shotguns up with him, so I figured it was him being a prick to everyone who was drunk. I checked my phone and went back to sleep. I fell asleep, and at what I think was around 3 a.m., I'm woken up by someone bawling their eyes out, and I'm still having a very hard time processing anything. After about 5 minutes, I realize it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent followed by Jeremy, and I walk out and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth, and I run over to him, stumbling the entire time. I am then hit in the head with a rock, and am knocked unconscious. Everything from this point is Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy, to this day, is my best friend and has told me his version of the story many times. He says I pass by a tree and a man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8", 140 pounds, and he describes the man as at least 6'4" and 280. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wooden monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol that Brent had also brought along with him, and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount, but it managed to startle him, and he sprints off into the woods. They just let him go, and Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife and a broken nose. Brent has never talked to me or any of my friends from that point on about the trip and what exactly happened when the man was outside with him alone. He also refused to give a description to the police. The man was never caught, and I have never been deep in the forest again.
This happened in the fall of 1993, when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory during the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male co-workers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job, but I proved myself and eventually earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it also put me in the best shape of my life. It was also about this time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive, as well as an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into this situation in the first place. I had just gotten off work, and it was about 1:30 a.m. My car was running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking nervous and scared. She said that she had been at her boyfriend's house and they'd had a fight. She'd walked to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up, and on her way to the station, a car had pulled up alongside her, and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large light green car, like a Caddy or a Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they'd threatened her and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well-dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out. So I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in my car and I'd take her home. At that time on a weeknight there was little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us, and when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept looking for the car. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed she was looking around the car, and she started asking me about money. "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money." My stomach sank. I have this woman in my car, and now she's going to rob me. Fuck. But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevy, affectionately nicknamed Shitbox, and was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling. "There they are! There they are!" She didn't sound scared anymore. I checked the rear view and sure enough, the light green car is now right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boys are gonna fuck you up, bitch. They're gonna fuck you up." She's laughing like crazy, opening the glove box and looking in the back for a bag or purse, telling me all the messed up shit these guys are planning to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I'd been very smart, I would have called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they'd arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really, really fucking angry. I realized 3 key things all at once. There was an intersection up ahead, with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment, and the crazy bitch still hadn't put her seatbelt on. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light, just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had started to move, and they hadn't caught up. The bitch started yelling. I slammed on the brakes and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and a viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some serious batshit crazy stuff. I can't remember exactly what I'd said, but it was along the lines of, "Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it, bitch." The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped the door open, and I started shoving and punching her until the bitch tumbled out of the door to the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn and squealed around it, with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while I stopped to close the passenger door, and then I cut across town and got onto the highway to go home. I was on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shakes started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down and get my shit together, and then I drove home. I told my older sister, who I was living with temporarily after the breakup with my ex. She wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life.
Before I start, here's a bit of context to my story. My husband and I live in a small 2-floor house with 2 main entrances, one along the front and the other along the side of the house, which opens up into our laundry room. When we're too busy, or it's too late to walk our dog, We hook his collar onto a long line that's attached to one of the pipes on the corner of our house, so he can use the bathroom. We used to do this from the door in our laundry room, but we notice the large steps from the door to the ground have been taking a toll on his hips. As a result, we started letting him out through the front door instead. Since the porch is much closer to the ground, this particular night, I was home alone with my dog, and it was around midnight when I decided to let him outside one last time before going to bed. I hook him up on the line, close the door, and lock up. This was pretty routine. Even if he used the bathroom quickly, he liked to walk around along the front and side of the house for a few minutes before coming back inside. As I'm putting away the dishes, I hear a scratch on the door. That's my dog's signal to tell me he wants to come back inside. So I head over to the door to let him back in. Since I watched way too many scary movies, I always look through the door's peephole before opening the door. Out of a habit, I look to check that my dog's in front of the door. Instead, I see a man staring very intently at the door handle. I freeze with my hand on the door handle. I don't know how much time went by, but then I heard another scratch, this one louder than the last. This kind of wakes me up from my initial shock, and I run to grab my cell phone. I call my husband to tell him what's happening. He was very confused. I probably wasn't explaining the situation very well, but says that he's heading home. This is when I realize my dog is still outside with this person. I head back to the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible to check whether the stranger is still there. Just like before, he's standing there, head bowed looking at the doorknob. I tiptoe over to the laundry room and slowly open the door as quietly as possible. I can't see my dog anywhere, and the side of my house is covered in gravel. I knew I couldn't step outside without making a lot of noise. With my heart still pounding in my chest, I go to the front door to keep an eye on the stranger and get a better look at him. I considered to call the police, but I didn't feel they would take me seriously. Since all this man was doing was standing in front of my house, I tried taking a picture of him with my cell phone, but my camera was only able to take a picture of the peephole and not the image behind the glass. All of a sudden, the man looks up directly at me. I swear he knows I'm there. He glares at me, then opens his mouth to show his taunting, malicious grin. He stood there, that way for a few seconds. With that, he turns around and starts to walk down the street. I stay in the same place, almost expecting him to rush back and start pounding on the door. Luckily, my husband got back after a few minutes. Long story short, he convinced me to call the police, and we went out looking for our dog. It turns out this man had cut the end of the line connecting to the pipe, and our dog decided this was a good time for him to explore my neighbor's backyard, which was where we found him. It's been 3 years since this happened. We've since moved to a new house, unrelated reasons, and the police weren't able to come up with any suspects. Ever since then, we take our dog on very long walks before the sun goes down.
Yesterday I was at my sister's house with my mum watching my son and my nephews play in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off of a tree, and it made me remember an old encounter that I had when I was a kid. I murmured, "It's so weird," out loud, thinking about what had happened all those years ago. My mum inquired as to what I was talking about, so I told her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at the Pinecone Forest, which was what the neighbourhood kids called our small patch of trees on the side of the road. I was picking bark off of one of the trees to pass some time, waiting for my friend Frankie to finish his homework and come out to play. Then suddenly, out of nowhere it seemed, a guy came up to me. I smelt him before I saw him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke, and I was kind of scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a very lazy eye that was cloudy, and his teeth and fingernails were stained yellow. My mum had always taught me to be nice to people, even if they don't look like me, so I faked a smile and said hello. "What are you doing?" he asked me. The smell of his breath was the worst. I'm picking the bark off of this tree." "You shouldn't do that. It's like picking off the tree's skin. How would you feel if someone picked off your skin?" he said, while lightly pinching my arm with his sharp yellow nails. "I don't know," I replied and took my arm back. Just then Frankie's mum called for me from out the front door and told me to come and wait inside. I didn't think anything of the whole thing at the time. When I told my mum about it, she had this look of, I don't know, guilt maybe? She said that it's probably time I know the whole story. She thought I'd forgotten about this encounter, so she never brought it up to me. First thing you should know is that the neighbourhood I grew up in was a small, tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and there was no reason for an outsider to come unless they knew someone there. Anyway, here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mum, Sonia, had noticed a white van that had no windows parked on the side of the road. Cliché, right? She didn't recognise it, but figured maybe it was someone visiting a neighbour. Sonia said, or rather had told the police, that the van had been there all morning and into the afternoon. She was kind of keeping an eye on it because it gave her a bad feeling. The front of our house had a huge window that faced the pinecone forest, and the van was parked next to it. She'd seen me waiting for Frankie, so at this point kept a constant eye on the van whilst holding the phone just in case. She saw the man exit the back of the van and walk up to me. As soon as she saw him, grab my arm and pinch me, she called the cops, and that was when she called me into the house. The cops stopped the guy just outside of my neighbourhood, and in the back of his van were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, and pictures of me taped all over the walls and ceiling. Me at school, me at my grandparents' house, at the bank with my mum. Just me everywhere I went. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him. Inside the unit they found a cabinet full of knives. A lot of knives. Paring knives, a butcher's cleaver, a thin flay knife, a melon baller, and all sorts of various knives of all shapes and sizes. There was also a few anatomy books, obstetrical equipment, duct tape, and 10 empty 5-gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients, so it had wrist and ankle straps, and the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. The last my mum heard was that he was in a high-security mental institution for the criminally insane. I have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on, until one night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home, until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you finally decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there, and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking," and for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, even bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out of my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bench at a bus stop. We made brief eye contact, and then I quickly looked away. It was too late, and I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out of the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and all my windows were up. Then I moved my right foot above the accelerator, just in case, and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would be just an awkward exchange, and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me, so I could just get out of there, but I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag, and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her, and she motioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined that pushing too hard on the window button, it would just come all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she did not seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny, and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by her boyfriend, but there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, and like she was disconnected from the moment. That made my skin crawl, and after a brief debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and could not give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her that I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me." At this point, the light changed, and I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward, and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then looked down at me, and again leaned in closer and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark.
I grew up in an extremely rural western state. My family lived in a country between 2 small towns. I attended school in both small towns and knew most of the families in the area, either by face or last name. One night, it was around 10 or 11, and I was leaving a high school basketball game in Town A. I was around 15 and was driving on my school permit past curfew. I had borrowed my uncle's car, an early 90s Toyota, with a leak in the gas tank that caused me to run out of gas before I made it more than 5 or 6 miles out of the town, and I had about 7 left to go. I was on a long stretch of road that served as a shortcut between 2 main highways in the aforementioned towns and wasn't heavily traveled. There were a few houses, but they were stretched far apart, and at the time, as well as to this day, cell phone reception was very spotty. I waited a while, and finally a nice, newer, red truck with an extended cab, a toolbox in the back, and a construction company logo on one side pulled up. It was Friday or Saturday night, and there was a man inside the truck with a woman and 2 girls. He offered me his phone. I remember noticing it was a track phone, which my friends and I at the time referred to as crack phones, because you couldn't trace the owners, and they are frequently used by drug addicts. They're also used by a lot of people who can't afford a standard phone plan. But the family was driving a really nice vehicle, and they seemed super clean cut, so it struck me as odd. The phone had no reception. I tried calling my parents a few times and gave up. The truck had been heading away from Town B towards Town A, where I had just come from. So when they offered me a ride, I thought nothing of it. I had a gas can in the truck, and all my friends lived in Town A, so I figured they could drop me off at a gas station on the way to their destination, and I could find a ride back with somebody I knew. When I got in the car, I was caught off guard by the way the women, who I assume was his wife, and the two girls, who I assume were their children, were dressed. Conservative families, even Amish and Mennonites, aren't uncommon where I'm from, but for the man being otherwise modern, wearing jeans, driving a sort of flashy truck, and owning a cell phone, the female's clothing surprised me. They all wore heavy, long skirts and button-up blouses and thin bonnets on their heads. One of the girls seemed to have a disability and made grunting noises every so often. Other than their noises, the women were completely silent. Everything seemed fine to me until the man driving turned around and started driving the opposite way of the direction he had been driving. The closest town the other way was still 15 more miles, and it seemed out of his way. I reminded him that I come from Town A, knew everyone there, and could find a ride home. It was late, and I figured he needed to get his family where they were going. That's when he told me that he was from Town B, and that he had a full gas can waiting at his house, and that he would take me there and bring me back to the car to fill it up. Still trying to be polite, I told him it was unnecessary, and my house was on the way to Town B, just a few miles away, and he could drop me off there. He didn't reply. I started to feel like something was off. I'm from an area where people go out of their way to help others, but it seemed like too much. I had insisted numerous times that he didn't have to drive nearly 30 miles out of his way to get me gas. He could simply drop me off on his way to his destination, or if he wanted to make sure I made it home fine, he could drop me off at home. In my uneasiness, I started making small talk. I asked him his name, and his last name was unfamiliar to me, which is surprising, but not totally unbelievable, coming from a town of around 3,000 people, where I had spent my first decade of my life, and where both of my parents still worked. I remember wishing that I paid attention to this construction company, name of the truck, since most companies in my area were named after families. As we got closer to the turnoff to my house, I started getting more frantic. I realized that these people, who didn't even seem overly friendly, were insisting that we drive completely out of the way late at night in a company van to fix a fairly commonplace mishap. I had no idea who they were. I had never seen them before. I had no cell phone reception, and their cell phone wasn't undetectable. Even if it wasn't what they were trying to do, making me disappear would be a pretty easy task. I started to kind of shriek that they could just drop me off at my house, but nobody in the car seemed like they heard me. Finally, in a fit of panic, I screamed at the top of my voice, "This is my turn, take me home. Please, take me home right now." Finally, for the first time, the wife spoke up, yelling at the man angrily and somewhat annoyed. "Just fucking take her home." Outside of the girls grunting, the car fell silent. He swerved angrily onto my road. He pulled into my driveway, let me out, and then reversed out of the driveway so fast that his tires spit gravel, and I couldn't even see the license plate or the name of the company through the dust. I ran inside and woke up my parents and told them what happened. They just yelled at me because I was driving past curfew. I don't know for sure what the intentions were, and maybe they just wanted to help, but I felt really uneasy the whole time. Not as scary as some of the stuff on here, but that's my experience.